The city never sleeps, but tonight Manhattan feels different. Somewhere in the glass towers and neon-lit streets, a predator watches, calculating every move. Damien Black, CEO, philanthropist, and untouchable king of his empire, believes no one can touch him. But there's someone in the shadows, someone who sees the patterns others ignore. Ethan Carter is a former FBI agent, now a corporate security consultant, who has noticed the subtle anomalies, the financial whispers, the cracks in the illusion. Alongside Sophia Hayes, a brilliant and enigmatic ally, he begins to uncover a truth more dangerous than he ever imagined. What happens when the untouchable falls? When loyalty is tested, betrayals are revealed, and power is questioned. This is a story of shadows and whispers, of calculated risks and silent victories, where one mistake could cost everything, and one revelation could bring down a king. The streets of Manhattan at night had a rhythm all their own. Neon signs flickered against rain-slicked pavement, taxis honked in a chaotic symphony, and somewhere far off, a siren wailed like a mournful ghost. It was the kind of night that made you feel both alive and invisible at the same time, as if the city itself were breathing over your shoulder. Ethan Carter adjusted the collar of his trench coat and stepped out of the elevator onto the dimly lit parking garage. The scent of wet concrete mixed with exhaust fumes clung to him, and he welcomed it. It was ordinary, unremarkable, a stark contrast to the world he'd recently re-entered. 4 years Ethan had been an FBI agent, chasing ghosts and criminals who seemed untouchable. Now, working as a corporate security consultant for one of New York's largest financial firms, he often wondered if the monsters he pursued had only changed their costumes. Tonight, however, something felt different. The elevator doors closed with a quiet ding, and Ethan found himself alone with the hum of fluorescent lights. His phone vibrated in his pocket. A message. From an unknown number. Watch the numbers. Someone's playing a dangerous game. Ethan frowned. Cryptic, yes. But it wasn't the first time he had received warnings like this. In his previous life, a message like this might have been dismissed as an idle threat. Tonight, it felt like a whisper from the city itself, threading through the neon-lit streets to land right in his hand. He slid the phone back into his pocket and headed toward the exit, his steps echoing against the concrete. The garage door rumbled open, and the city spilled onto him like a living, breathing entity. Yellow cabs darted between buses and pedestrians, the smell of street food mingling with gasoline. Ethan pulled his coat tighter and scanned the crowd. A man in a hoodie paused at the corner, glancing toward him before melting into the night. Ethan noted the fleeting encounter but didn't pursue. In Manhattan, shadows were a currency of their own. Inside the building, the warmth hit him immediately. Marble floors, polished chrome, the faint hum of air conditioning, and the distant murmur of colleagues working late. It was familiar territory, yet it carried a tension that had nothing to do with the office politics. Ethan knew the kind of people who moved through these halls, the kind who smiled too brightly while hiding a knife in their pocket. He made his way to his office, a sleek space overlooking the river. From this vantage, the city lights seemed like stars fallen to earth. Ethan set his briefcase down, flipping it open with a practiced hand. Files, laptops, access cards. Tools of the trade. Tonight he would dig. Not out of curiosity but necessity. Something in the company's financials had caught his attention. A series of transactions too neat, too precise, as if someone were cleaning up a mess they didn't want anyone else to notice. He opened his laptop and began cross-referencing the ledgers. Each line of numbers told a story, and the patterns weren't coincidental. The sums didn't add up, and the timing of certain transfers suggested a hidden hand manipulating outcomes behind the scenes. Ethan leaned back, rubbing his temple. He had seen this before. In law enforcement, he'd learned to trust instincts over appearances. And right now, something screamed at him from these ledgers. Hours passed like minutes. Coffee grew cold beside him, but Ethan didn't care. Every anomaly he found seemed to fold into a larger puzzle. One that involved someone high up in the company hierarchy. Someone dangerous. The city outside continued its relentless pulse, indifferent to the secrets being uncovered in a solitary office high above the streets. A soft knock at the door made him start. Ethan? The voice was smooth, confident, and held a note of familiarity. He turned to see Sophia Hayes, the company's compliance manager, standing there. Her presence was both a comfort and a warning. Smart, calculated, and enigmatic, she was a woman who moved in shadows almost as skillfully as he did. Couldn't resist checking in? He asked, trying to keep his tone casual. Sophia stepped inside, closing the door behind her. I heard you've been poking around the numbers, she said, her eyes sharp. Be careful. Not everyone wants things to be noticed. Ethan's gaze met hers. He didn't need to ask who everyone was. He already knew. Damien Black. CEO, visionary, philanthropist on paper, but in the darker corridors of power, something else entirely. Someone who knew how to command loyalty, manipulate fear, and make enemies disappear without a trace. Sophia walked over to the window, leaning slightly against the glass. You don't know it yet, but you're walking a tightrope. One wrong step, and the city won't even remember your name. Ethan nodded, taking a deep breath. The weight of her words sank in. Manhattan was beautiful, but it was unforgiving. And Damien Black ruled over his domain like a quiet storm, controlled, precise, and deadly. The two of them worked in tandem for the next few hours, sifting through accounts, tracing wire transfers, and noting discrepancies. With each discovery, the web grew larger, stretching further than either of them expected. Names, dates, amounts, all hinting at something far more sinister than mere corporate greed. By the time the sun began to bleed through the eastern skyline, Ethan leaned back in his chair, exhaustion weighing heavily on him. He rubbed his eyes, staring out at the awakening city. Somewhere below, life continued, unaware of the darkness weaving through the towers and boardrooms. Are you ready for what this could mean? Sophia asked quietly. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He knew the answer in his gut. Yes, he was ready. Ready to step into the shadows of the city, where loyalty was a currency, betrayal was inevitable, and the line between right and wrong blurred into gray. Tonight was just the beginning. The morning sun had barely started to pierce through the glass towers of Manhattan when Ethan Carter returned to his office. The city was already alive. Traffic snarled, pedestrians hustled, the occasional honk of a taxi punctuating the morning air. From his vantage point on the 25th floor, the streets below looked like veins pumping life into the heart of a sleeping giant. To most, it was just another day in New York. To Ethan, it was a city cloaked in secrets. Damien Black had arrived early as always, moving through the office with the precision of a man who believed every second was his to control. CEO, visionary, philanthropist. The headlines called him a genius. The boardroom whispered of his charm. But Ethan had spent enough time reading people to know that charm often masked something more dangerous. There was a predator in those tailored suits, a wolf who smiled while circling his prey. Ethan had seen men like Damien before. The type who controlled loyalty not with fear alone but with manipulation so subtle that the line between ally and enemy blurred until it disappeared entirely. Damien's office, perched at the corner of the tower with a panoramic view of the skyline, was a fortress of glass and steel, immaculate yet somehow oppressive. Every object, every piece of furniture seemed chosen not for comfort but for control. Sophia Hayes appeared at Ethan's side, coffee in hand, her eyes scanning the office with a meticulous precision that made Ethan admire her and distrust her at the same time. "You've got that look again," she said softly, her tone almost conspiratorial. "The one that says you've already seen something you're not supposed to." Ethan allowed himself a faint smile. "I'm just observant," he replied, though he knew she wasn't fooled. Sophia had worked for Damien long enough to see through the layers of deceit and pretense. "But yes, there are patterns here. Things that don't add up." Her brow arched. "I've been watching too. Damien has ways of testing loyalty. He plays the long game, Ethan. He'll smile at you in the morning and throw a knife behind your back before lunch. And yet people still trust him. Or at least they pretend to." The words were quiet, but their weight pressed heavily against Ethan's chest. He knew she was right. In Damien Black's world, appearances were more important than truth, loyalty was bought and sold like stock, and mistakes were not forgiven, they were capitalized upon. Ethan's first task was to look into the recent series of financial transfers flagged by his instincts. The amounts were small enough to evade immediate notice but repeated with uncanny precision, always appearing in accounts tied to offshore entities, always disappearing before anyone could trace the origin. Someone was orchestrating these moves with surgical intent, and Ethan had the sinking feeling that Damien was at the center of it, or at least someone Damien trusted implicitly. Hours passed as Ethan and Sophia pored over spreadsheets, transaction records, and encrypted emails. Each discovery hinted at a broader conspiracy. Accounts that didn't exist on official ledgers, off-the-books communications, encrypted notes hidden in mundane documents. The deeper they went, the more they realized how far-reaching Damien's control extended. He didn't just command employees, he commanded information itself, bending truth to suit his desires. Sophia leaned back in her chair, sipping her coffee slowly. "You realize," she said, "this isn't just corporate greed. This is organized, methodical. Someone is laundering money, yes, but it's intertwined with influence. Politics, private contracts, maybe even criminal networks outside the company. Damien isn't just a CEO, he's a broker of power. Ethan nodded, feeling the familiar surge of tension that always accompanied the smell of danger. He had faced criminals before, ones who wore leather jackets and carried guns. But this was different. This predator wore Armani suits and smiled at board meetings. His weapons were influence, secrets, and fear veiled as courtesy. The office phone rang, its shrill tone breaking the focused silence. Ethan answered, expecting a routine call. Instead, the voice on the other end was calm, deliberate, and chilling. "Ethan Carter," the caller said, "you're poking your nose where it doesn't belong. Consider this a friendly warning. Step back or you'll regret it." Ethan's hand froze on the receiver. The calmness in the voice was worse than a scream. It meant control. The person on the other end knew him, knew exactly what he had discovered. The question wasn't if danger existed, it was how deep it ran. He hung up and turned to Sophia, who had been watching him with an unreadable expression. "That wasn't just a threat," he said. "That was a declaration." Sophia's lips pressed into a thin line. "And Damien loves to watch the game unfold. He doesn't threaten for the sake of intimidation alone. He watches reactions. He learns. And he adapts. If he knows you're on to him," she trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Ethan swallowed, the weight of the situation settling in his chest. He had to navigate this carefully. One wrong move, one glance that suggested suspicion, and Damien would know exactly where to strike. But turning away wasn't an option. The stakes were too high, not just for him but for anyone who trusted him. For the next few hours, Ethan and Sophia worked in silence, communicating in nods and glances rather than words. Every document they opened, every account they scrutinized, added pieces to a puzzle that painted Damien Black not merely as a corporate tyrant, but as a kingpin of a hidden empire, threading power and influence into every corner of the city. By mid-afternoon, Ethan leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. The numbers told a story, but stories weren't enough. They needed proof. Names, connections, dates, communications, something tangible. Something that could survive scrutiny, that could withstand the inevitable denials, lies, and legal maneuvers Damien would employ. Sophia looked over at him, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips despite the gravity of the situation. "You realize we're already deep," she said almost rhetorically. "There's no stepping back now. Once you start seeing the threads, you can't unsee them." Ethan exhaled slowly. She was right. The web stretched far beyond what either of them had imagined. Damien's influence wasn't confined to this office, this building, or even this city. It spanned political contacts, offshore accounts, legal loopholes, an entire ecosystem designed to protect him while exploiting others. And yet, Ethan felt the familiar surge of resolve that always came when danger loomed. This was his element, his skill set, the calm in chaos, the methodical mind in a sea of uncertainty. He would navigate the shadows of this city, unravel the threads Damien had woven, and expose the truth, one careful step at a time. The sun was dipping toward the horizon as the office grew darker, the city outside glowing with thousands of lives unaware of the machinations unfolding above them. Ethan and Sophia worked side by side, their presence a quiet defiance against a man who believed himself untouchable. Ethan glanced at Sophia. "We'll need more than just numbers," he said. "We'll need leverage, contacts, maybe even allies who aren't afraid of crossing Damien." She nodded, her eyes reflecting the city lights. "I know a few people. But be warned, they're not gentle souls. They play hardball. And in Damien's game, even friends can become enemies in a heartbeat." He felt the weight of the statement. Manhattan was beautiful, chaotic, unforgiving. Damien Black ruled over his empire like a silent storm, and Ethan Carter was about to step directly into it. Tonight, the first pieces of the puzzle were coming together. By the time the city slept, a quiet war would have begun. One fought not with guns or brute force, but with cunning, observation, and the ability to move unseen. And Ethan knew with absolute certainty that there was no turning back now. The city outside Ethan's office had already settled into the uneasy rhythm of evening. Neon lights flickered off wet asphalt, and the occasional horn blared from taxis stuck in traffic below. From this height, the streets looked like veins, carrying life in endless motion, oblivious to the silent war that was beginning above them. Ethan Carter sat hunched over his laptop, the glow of the screen painting sharp angles across his face. Each keystroke felt deliberate, almost ritualistic as he traced the paths of transactions, emails, and internal communications. Somewhere deep in the spreadsheets and encrypted messages lay the truth, hidden in plain sight. And Ethan was determined to find it. It began with a message. A simple email, its origin obscured. Some things are better left unseen. Some truths are dangerous. Ethan frowned. The words carried an eerie calmness. Not a threat, but a whisper, a reminder that the deeper he dug, the closer he moved to something that could break him or everyone around him. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes, and exhaled. The warning could have come from anyone. A concerned coworker? A corporate whistleblower? Or, more likely, someone sent by Damien Black himself. The possibility made his stomach tighten. Damien was a predator. He didn't issue threats casually. Every word, every glance, every handshake was calculated to manipulate perception, loyalty, and fear. Sophia Hayes entered the office quietly, her presence grounding him. "Another one?" she asked, nodding toward the screen. Ethan tilted his head toward her. "Yes. Anonymous. Obvious or not, it's a signal. Someone's watching." She leaned against the edge of his desk, arms folded, eyes scanning the city lights outside. "Welcome to Damien's world. He doesn't need to watch constantly. He just sets the pieces in motion and observes reactions. That's how he controls everything without ever touching it himself." Ethan's gaze returned to the spreadsheet. Numbers, dates, and names blurred together, but a pattern was beginning to emerge. Certain accounts had unusual spikes of activity just before Damien held high-level meetings. Transfers would vanish into offshore entities hours later. Subtle, almost invisible unless someone with a trained eye examined them closely. Ethan had trained for exactly this. The difference was now the stakes weren't abstract, they were dangerously real. He swiveled his chair slightly and noticed Sophia watching him intently. "You realize what this means, don't you?" she said softly. "This isn't just fraud or corporate theft. Whoever's doing this is moving power and money in a way that could dismantle entire networks, manipulate contracts, even influence political decisions." Ethan didn't respond immediately. He had begun to feel a creeping sensation in his chest, a mixture of exhilaration and unease. This wasn't a simple investigation, it was a labyrinth, and every twist and turn carried potential consequences he couldn't fully anticipate. He began tracing IP addresses, using his old FBI instincts to map out potential sources of the mysterious communications. Each trail was a whisper, leading him deeper into a world he had hoped to leave behind. Offshore accounts, encrypted emails, coded messages hidden in routine correspondence. Someone had orchestrated this web with precision. Ethan knew instinctively that Damien wasn't the only player. There were others. Allies in the shadows. Potential enemies disguised as friends. A subtle click from the hallway made him glance up. Sophia noticed too, and her hand hovered near the door latch. "You think someone's here?" she asked quietly. Ethan shook his head. "Probably just the cleaning crew. But Damien loves to remind people that he's always aware. One glance at the wrong screen, and he'll know exactly who's been looking." They returned to their work, moving with quiet efficiency, communicating in glances, gestures, and shorthand. Every document opened, every transaction traced, felt like navigating a minefield. And every step forward was a calculated risk. Hours passed and the city outside darkened. Ethan leaned back, exhaustion tugging at his muscles, but he couldn't stop. The web of deceit was too intricate, too dangerous. Then, just as he thought he was uncovering a clear connection, a new element appeared. A person in Damien's inner circle whose behavior didn't match their public persona. A junior executive, apparently loyal and unassuming, had been quietly funneling information to unknown recipients. The trail was subtle but unmistakable. Someone close to Ethan, someone he had trusted, was betraying him, perhaps even feeding Damien information about his investigation. Sophia noticed the change in his expression. "You see it," she said. "I told you the wolves don't all wear suits in the boardroom. Some hide behind the ones you trust most." Ethan's jaw tightened. The betrayal cut deeper than he expected. In the FBI, betrayal had been a professional hazard. Now, in the corporate jungle, it carried stakes that could mean ruined careers, destroyed lives, or worse. And he realized that understanding this betrayal was just the beginning. To move forward, he would need allies he could trust completely, or craft deception so convincing that even Damien wouldn't suspect a thing. By late evening, the office was quiet. The hum of the city below contrasted with the tension high above. Ethan and Sophia had mapped a preliminary picture of the financial manipulations, traced communications, and identified potential points of leverage. Yet the deeper they went, the more they understood the sheer scale of Damien's empire. This wasn't just corporate corruption, it was an ecosystem of influence, a network that touched politics, media, law enforcement, and organized crime. Sophia stood by the window, her silhouette framed against the twinkling lights. "You know," she said almost to herself, "we're not just chasing numbers anymore. We're chasing shadows." Ethan's eyes followed her gaze. "Shadows that can kill," he said quietly. "And we're in the middle of it." They worked through the night, moving with careful precision, their partnership solidified by necessity and the shared understanding that every move mattered. Each discovery increased the stakes, but also gave them clarity. Damien Black's influence was extensive, but it was not infallible. He had built his empire on secrecy, deception, and fear, but even the most meticulous predator could be outmaneuvered by someone who understood the patterns, the psychology, and the stakes. As the first hints of dawn touched the skyline, Ethan leaned back, fatigue etched into his features. The city below was waking, oblivious to the dangerous game unfolding in its midst. The patterns were clearer now, the trail less obscured, but danger loomed closer than ever. Damien Black was not a man to make idle threats. Someone had already sent a warning, and Ethan knew it would not be the last. He turned to Sophia. "We need to move fast," he said. "If Damien even suspects we're piecing this together," his voice trailed off. She nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Outside, the city roared to life, indifferent to the quiet war raging above it. Ethan Carter knew that the night had only revealed the first layer. The real challenge, the real danger, lay in what was still hidden. The whispers in the dark, the secrets buried deep in Damien Black's empire. And Ethan was about to step further into them, whether he was ready or not. Tonight the game had begun. And the shadows were watching. The office felt heavier that morning. The hum of fluorescent lights seemed louder, the taps of keyboards sharper, and every footstep in the hallway echoing like a warning. Ethan Carter walked in with a precision born of experience, sensing the invisible currents of deceit that flowed just beneath the polished surfaces. Manhattan was alive outside, a city oblivious to the silent game unfolding in its highest towers, but inside, tension coiled like a snake ready to strike. He headed to his workstation, already reviewing the findings from the night before. The spreadsheets, encrypted emails, and offshore accounts painted a picture that was gradually taking shape. A financial empire built not just on corporate manipulation but on fear, control, and secrecy. Damien Black was no ordinary CEO. He was a predator who concealed a kingdom of influence behind a charismatic smile. And Ethan was now squarely in the crosshairs. As he sifted through the data, a subtle movement caught his eye. Martin Kessler, a junior analyst, ostensibly dedicated and unassuming, had lingered at Ethan's doorway for an unusually long moment before retreating. It was the kind of observation that could mean nothing, or everything. Ethan's instincts screamed that it was the latter. Sophia Hayes arrived shortly after, her eyes sharp as ever. She glanced at Ethan and immediately noticed the tension. "Something's off," she murmured, leaning over his shoulder to examine the screen. "That's not just the numbers. Look at Martin's activity logs. There's been an unusual spike in access to sensitive files, and some of the email correspondence is, well, let's just say it doesn't belong to him." Ethan frowned. The realization hit like a cold wind. "He's feeding someone information," Ethan said, his voice low. "And it's precise. He knows exactly what to look at and what to hide." Sophia's eyes narrowed. "Do you think it's Damien? Either him or someone directly under him. Either way, Martin's the conduit." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, the weight of betrayal pressing down. "And we've already underestimated the layers of deception in this place." They decided to confront the issue cautiously. Ethan approached Martin under the guise of casual discussion, while Sophia monitored emails and system logs. The office seemed to shrink around him, the walls pressing closer as he entered the space. Martin smiled, the kind of casual, innocent smile that hides calculation. But Ethan could feel it in his bones, the pretense, the lie. "Morning, Martin," Ethan began, his tone light. "I noticed you've been accessing some of the financial reports outside your usual responsibilities. Everything okay?" Martin's smile didn't falter. "Oh, just curious," he said smoothly. "Trying to understand the big picture. You know how it is, sometimes the details make the whole story clearer." Ethan nodded slowly, masking the storm inside. "Of course. But just remember, some details aren't meant to be seen without authorization. Security is tight for a reason." Martin's eyes flickered for a brief instant, a micro-expression Ethan caught immediately. Something unguarded, just a fraction of a second revealing guilt. He nodded again, smiling. "Understood. Won't happen again." As Martin walked away, Ethan and Sophia exchanged a glance. The betrayal wasn't just a minor breach, it was the first crack in a wall they thought unbreakable. Someone close, someone trusted, was operating under Damien's influence, feeding the predator information while Ethan and Sophia navigated the labyrinth. The stakes just skyrocketed. By afternoon, Ethan had mapped the internal communications, tracing the flow of information from Martin to accounts and emails outside the company. Each discovery added tension. The deeper they went, the more they realized the extent of Damien Black's empire, connections spanning political figures, private contractors, even law enforcement liaisons. Damien was a master manipulator, orchestrating events with precision so subtle it appeared as chance. Sophia poured herself a fresh coffee, her eyes still scanning lines of data. "You see why he's untouchable, don't you?" she said. "It's not just wealth. It's control over perception, loyalty, fear. People don't betray him by accident. They do it because they believe it's in their best interest." Ethan leaned back, exhaustion creeping in, but determination burning brighter. "And we're about to test that perception," he said quietly. "If Damien thinks we don't know, we can manipulate him, turn his own game against him." That night, they devised a subtle plan: feed selective information, monitor reactions, and trace every link that led back to Damien. It was a delicate dance, requiring patience and precision. One misstep could expose them, one wrong glance, and they could become the next pawns in his game. Hours passed with tense silence. Sophia and Ethan moved methodically, each keystroke, each click a calculated risk. In the shadows of the office, the first cracks in Damien's fortress of control were beginning to show. And yet, the danger was palpable. Martin Kessler, the first betrayer, had set a precedent. There were likely more within Damien's ranks, eyes watching, ears listening, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Ethan paused, staring at the screen as the office lights flickered subtly with the city's electricity. Manhattan's skyline stretched endlessly before them, vibrant and indifferent. But within these walls, the stakes had never been higher. The predator in the corner office was patient, meticulous, and ruthlessly intelligent. And now, Ethan was locked in a game where the rules were written by the wolf, and the consequences were deadly. Sophia's voice broke the silence. "We'll need to dig deeper," she said, tone firm but calm. "Find who else is compromised. Understand the full network. Damien isn't sloppy. Whoever he's put in place, they're precise. And they're dangerous." Ethan nodded, a cold resolve settling in his chest. This was no longer just a corporate investigation. It was survival, strategy, and psychological warfare. Each revelation brought clarity but also increased the peril. Every interaction, every document, every whisper in the hall could be a trap. By the early hours of morning, Ethan and Sophia had constructed a tentative map of influence, tracing the paths of money, communication, and loyalty. Damien Black's network was vast, layered, and nearly impervious. But even a fortress could be breached if one understood its foundations. Ethan leaned back, exhaustion heavy, but a spark of anticipation lit his eyes. "We know who the first betrayer is," he said quietly. "Now it's time to see how deep the rot goes. And more importantly, how Damien reacts when he realizes we're onto him." Sophia nodded, understanding the magnitude of the statement. "The first betrayal is always the loudest. The rest follow if you know where to look." Ethan stared out at the skyline, absorbing the city's pulse. Somewhere below, life continued, oblivious to the silent struggle raging above. Every second that passed tightened the tension, every shadow could conceal a threat. Manhattan, vibrant and chaotic, was now a chessboard, and he was moving carefully, deliberately, piece by piece. Tonight marked the first confrontation with deception. The first betrayal had been revealed, but it was only the beginning. Damien Black's empire was vast, his control near absolute, and Ethan Carter was now fully awake to the reality. He was not just uncovering fraud or secrets. He was stepping into a battle of intellect, loyalty, and survival. And the night, like the city itself, was watching. The city had settled into the quiet hum of late evening, though Manhattan never truly slept. The streets glistened from an earlier rain, reflecting neon signs and headlights like shards of broken glass. From Ethan Carter's vantage point high above, the world seemed calm, almost serene. But he knew better. Calm was often a mask for danger. Tonight, Ethan and Sophia were no longer observers. They had crossed a line. The preliminary mapping of Damien Black's empire had revealed inconsistencies, suspicious transfers, and most importantly, the first betrayal by Martin Kessler. Now they had to go further, to confront the heart of the empire itself. In the shadows of the corporate office, they moved silently, navigating corridors and empty meeting rooms. Security cameras, motion sensors, and the omnipresent presence of Damien's loyalists had turned the building into a labyrinth. Ethan's pulse quickened, not from fear but from the thrill of being fully awake in the game. Sophia led the way to a restricted server room, her fingers brushing against the keypad with ease. "I've worked here long enough to know the codes that aren't supposed to be used," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "We have 10 minutes before anyone notices." Ethan watched the door unlock, tension coiling in his chest. Every step, every sound could betray them. He kept his eyes on the hallways, scanning for guards or employees who might wander too close. "Ready?" he asked. Sophia nodded, a hint of a smirk on her lips. "As ready as we'll ever be." Inside the server room, the air was cool, humming with the energy of countless machines. Ethan and Sophia moved to the main terminal, connecting their encrypted drives and preparing to sift through layers of files, encrypted emails and hidden folders. Damien Black's network was meticulous, every layer of protection designed to obfuscate, mislead, and trap the unwary. They began the process carefully, cross-referencing known accounts, tracing transactions and analyzing communications. Each discovery revealed the scope of Damien's influence. Offshore accounts tied to shell companies, subtle financial manipulations designed to obscure the flow of money, and encrypted emails hinting at alliances with figures in politics, law enforcement, and even the media. Hours passed like minutes as they worked, their focus absolute. Ethan's mind was a machine parsing data, connecting dots, and identifying patterns. Sophia's attention to detail complemented him perfectly. She could spot anomalies that might escape even the most trained eye. Together, they were beginning to peel back the layers of Damien's empire. Then came the first real danger. The door to the server room clicked, soft, but enough to make Ethan freeze mid-motion. A security guard, making a late-night round, had entered the hallway. Ethan's mind raced. They couldn't be caught here. Not tonight, not ever. "Stay calm," he whispered. "Follow my lead." They powered down the terminal just enough to appear dormant and slipped behind a row of tall server racks. The guard paused, humming softly, scanning the room. Ethan held his breath, counting heartbeats in silence. Sophia pressed herself against the cold metal, silent as a shadow. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, the guard left, his footsteps fading down the corridor. Ethan exhaled slowly, and Sophia allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. "We can't underestimate him," she said. "Damien doesn't just rely on systems. He relies on people, predators in suits, watching, waiting." They returned to their work, more cautiously this time. Every folder opened, every line of code traced, added new pieces to the puzzle. They discovered accounts moving millions of dollars through shell companies, discreetly funneling funds into ventures that were seemingly legitimate on the surface. Each transaction was a thread, connecting Damien to unseen players in the criminal and political arenas. Ethan's mind was alert, his instincts sharp. He recognized patterns from his FBI days, how organized crime adapts, how powerful individuals manipulate perception and loyalty. Damien was a master of disguise, operating in broad daylight while keeping his claws hidden. Yet, for every carefully laid layer, there was a trace, a thread that Ethan could follow. Hours later, the first substantial breakthrough occurred. Hidden within encrypted correspondence was a chain of emails connecting Damien Black to a network of offshore financial operatives and intermediaries, some of whom had direct ties to known criminal entities. The implication was staggering. Damien's empire was not merely corporate, it was a hybrid of finance, organized crime, and political influence, a web so intricate it was nearly impossible to unravel completely. Sophia leaned back, letting out a long breath. This is bigger than we imagined. Damien isn't just playing with numbers. He's playing with entire systems. Ethan nodded, his mind already racing ahead. And he thinks no one sees him. That arrogance will be his undoing. But the deeper they went, the more Ethan realized the stakes. Martin Kessler had already been compromised, and there were undoubtedly others within the organization feeding information. One wrong step, one overlooked detail, and their presence here would be exposed. Damien had contingencies for almost everything. Almost. Sophia's phone buzzed. A message. She read it silently, her eyes narrowing. "It's from a source we didn't expect," she whispered. "Someone high up, someone with access to everything. They want to meet." Discreetly. Ethan's pulse quickened. "We're not walking into a trap?" "Possibly," Sophia replied. "But if we want to bring Damien down, we need allies who aren't afraid to cross him. And this is our only lead." The night stretched on as they finalized their plans. They would continue gathering evidence, feeding selective information to mislead Damien, and carefully map every connection. Each move was a calculated risk. Each decision carried consequences not just for them, but for anyone involved in Damien's network. As dawn broke over the skyline, the city below began to stir. Manhattan seemed serene, indifferent to the chaos hidden in the glass towers above. Ethan leaned against the window, exhaustion tugging at his muscles, yet determination burned brighter than ever. Crossing this line, accessing restricted data, confronting betrayal, navigating danger, was only the beginning. The real game was just starting. Damien Black would not sit idly by. He would react. And Ethan Carter, together with Sophia Hayes, was ready to meet him head-on, armed with knowledge, instinct, and the relentless drive to expose the truth. Manhattan had a way of hiding the dangerous in plain sight. The bright lights, bustling crowds, and constant noise created a camouflage for the city's predators. Ethan Carter had always known this, but tonight, as he and Sophia Hayes prepared to delve deeper into Damien Black's empire, the truth of it hit harder than ever. After days of tracing financial trails, mapping communications, and identifying the first betrayal within their ranks, Ethan realized that Damien's reach extended far beyond the polished offices and gleaming skyscrapers of Manhattan. Offshore accounts were only the beginning. Private contractors, shell corporations, political connections, and figures with reputations darker than any headline, they all moved in silence, orchestrating a network designed to be invisible, untouchable. Sophia had arranged a meeting with an informant, someone who operated within the fringes of Damien's network but had reasons to reveal certain truths. Ethan felt a mixture of anticipation and unease. The man they were about to meet was known only as Lucien, a shadow in the underworld, rumored to have direct ties to organized crime across several states. His loyalty was questionable, his motives opaque, but he had knowledge Ethan couldn't ignore. They entered a small cafe in the East Village, its dim lighting and quiet ambience perfect for clandestine discussions. Ethan's eyes scanned the room as Sophia whispered, "Lucien should be here any minute. Watch for anyone unusual, he's careful but not infallible." Minutes passed, stretching longer than they should have. Ethan sipped his coffee, listening to the hum of conversation around them, pretending to read a tablet while his senses remained alert. Then a figure slipped into the booth across from them, a man in his late 40s wearing a dark coat, eyes scanning the room like a hawk. "Lucien." "Ethan Carter," Lucien said smoothly, his voice calm, measured. "I've heard about you." He paused, letting the weight of the statement settle. "And about your little friend, Sophia?" Ethan inclined his head. "We're listening." Lucien's eyes flickered, assessing them. "Damien Black is more dangerous than you imagine. His network spans farther than New York, farther than you even suspect. Offshore accounts, shell companies, those are the surface. Below that, he has connections to enforcement, politics, even law. He's untouchable if you only rely on conventional methods." Sophia leaned forward. "Then how do we touch him?" Lucien smiled faintly. "You don't touch him directly. You find the weak points, the people who slip, the operations that rely on trust, and the patterns that reveal his hand. But understand this, crossing him is like stepping onto ice above a river full of predators. One wrong move and you disappear." Ethan's mind raced. The patterns they had uncovered in the company were just one layer. Damien had built a fortress of loyalty, fear, and influence. To dismantle it, they would need more than data, they would need strategy, patience, and alliances that could survive exposure. As Lucien continued to outline the network, he revealed names, places, and methods Ethan had only suspected. There were meetings in unassuming buildings, coded communications through innocuous channels, and intermediaries who would never admit to having any connection to Damien. Every revelation deepened the complexity of the web. After the meeting, Ethan and Sophia walked back into the night, the city alive around them, oblivious to the dangerous knowledge they carried. "We're playing a high-stakes game," Ethan said, voice low. "And we're the only ones aware of all the pieces." Sophia nodded. "High stakes, yes. But we have something Damien doesn't, perspective. We see the entire board, not just one piece." Back at their office, they began incorporating the new intelligence into their ongoing investigation. Mapping connections, tracing communications, and analyzing the implications of each reveal. Every discovery brought clarity, but also heightened danger. The deeper they delved, the more they understood the breadth of Damien's empire and the ruthlessness with which he protected it. Then came a subtle yet chilling sign. Martin Kessler, the first betrayer, had not only fed information to Damien but had begun altering logs to mislead Ethan and Sophia subtly. It was a quiet deception, hidden in plain sight, but Ethan noticed it immediately. The betrayal was more profound than he had anticipated. Damien's influence was not just external, it had infiltrated their investigation itself. Sophia looked over the evidence, her expression hardening. "He's testing us," she said. "Every move we make, every discovery is being monitored. Damien wants to see how far we're willing to go, what lines we'll cross." Ethan's jaw tightened. They had crossed several lines already, accessing restricted files, confronting betrayal, meeting dangerous informants, but now the stakes escalated. Damien was aware, patient, and watching. Any misstep could be fatal. As night deepened, Ethan and Sophia worked side by side, integrating Lucien's information with their own findings. Patterns emerged. Certain transfers aligned with political events, offshore accounts tied to companies and cities they hadn't considered, and communications that hinted at direct contact with law enforcement personnel. Damien Black's network was vast, layered, and nearly impervious, but for the first time Ethan felt a tangible foothold. "You know," Sophia murmured as she highlighted lines of communication on a digital map, "Damien thrives on the illusion of control. He makes people believe they are free to act, but in reality, they're moving exactly where he wants them. And yet even he can't predict everything." Ethan considered her words. The path forward would require patience, cunning, and an understanding of human behavior as much as data analysis. Damien was not a man to underestimate, but he was also not infallible. Every empire had a weak point. Every predator had a moment of vulnerability. As dawn approached, the city began to stir once more. Manhattan's streets glistened with the first light, reflecting the beginnings of a new day. Ethan Carter looked over the skyline, contemplating the road ahead. Hidden in plain sight, Damien Black controlled a network so sophisticated that even the most experienced agents would struggle to dismantle it. But Ethan was determined. He had seen shadows, whispers, and the subtle betrayals that others missed. And tonight, he understood that survival and victory depended on knowing exactly how to move through the darkness without being seen. Crossing lines wasn't just a metaphor anymore, it was a necessity. They had entered Damien's world fully, and there was no turning back. The game was escalating, the stakes higher than ever, and the shadows were closing in from all sides. The first hint came in the form of a glance. Ethan noticed it across the boardroom, subtle yet unmistakable, a flicker of recognition in Damien Black's eyes that suggested awareness. Damien had a way of making people feel seen, even when they believed themselves invisible. Ethan understood immediately. Damien knew. He didn't know the full extent of their investigation yet, but he sensed that something was amiss. The boardroom, with its sleek glass walls and panoramic views, seemed to shrink around Ethan as Damien moved gracefully, almost imperceptibly, closer. Damien smiled, warm and commanding, greeting colleagues as if nothing were wrong. But Ethan's trained eye caught every twitch, every micro-expression. Damien was a predator aware of intruders in his domain. And Ethan and Sophia were trespassers. Sophia, sitting slightly behind Ethan, noticed his tension. "He knows something," she whispered, her fingers tapping lightly against the table. "It's subtle, but he's watching reactions, gauging behavior. That's Damien's signature." Ethan nodded, maintaining a casual posture. Damien's gaze lingered, searching for the slightest deviation. "We need to act normal," Ethan murmured. "As if nothing's changed. The moment he suspects, the game shifts, and will be exposed." The meeting proceeded, Damien discussing company strategy and upcoming mergers with fluid charisma. Yet every word, every gesture was a test. Ethan noted patterns in Damien's speech, how he emphasized certain names and projects, the pauses that seemed accidental but were deliberate. Damien's control was not just in his position or wealth, it was in manipulation itself. He had created an environment where people acted as he desired without ever being ordered, relying on fear, ambition, and subtle influence. After the meeting, Damien requested a private discussion with Ethan. The tone was friendly, almost conspiratorial, but Ethan understood the underlying message. The predator was aware of the prey's movements. In Damien's office, walls lined with awards and cityscape views, the air felt dense with tension. "Ethan," Damien began, voice smooth, almost casual, "I hear you've been paying close attention to our financials. Curious, isn't it?" He smiled, leaning back in his chair. "Sometimes attention can be a blessing. Other times, it can be dangerous." Ethan maintained composure, nodding slightly. "Attention is necessary in any operation, sir. Oversight ensures stability." Damien's smile never faltered, but his eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "Of course. But some things," he said slowly, "are better left undiscovered. Don't you agree?" The subtle threat was unmistakable. Damien was sending a signal, testing Ethan's response. Ethan chose silence, allowing the message to linger without acknowledgement. He understood the stakes: reveal any sign of fear and Damien would exploit it. Any overt reaction could trigger the next phase of Damien's control game. Back at their office, Ethan and Sophia exchanged glances. The first true recognition had occurred. Damien was aware, not fully but enough to adapt. They had crossed a threshold. The silent switch had been flipped. Over the next days, Ethan noticed changes in Damien's behavior. Meetings were longer, observations sharper, and interactions more calculated. Damien employed subtle psychological traps: reassignment of tasks to test loyalty, introducing rumors to gauge reactions, and manipulating office dynamics to create tension among employees. Every movement was precise, designed to destabilize those who might threaten his control. Ethan and Sophia adjusted their approach. Every step was measured. Communications became more encrypted, their access to sensitive data more covert. They fed controlled information into their investigation, observing reactions. Damien's eyes and ears extended far beyond the office, but there were gaps, moments of overconfidence that could be exploited. The first minor victory came when an internal memo, meant for executive eyes only, was altered in a way that betrayed the presence of an unknown observer. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable to anyone else, but Ethan recognized it immediately. Damien's network was vast, but even the most meticulous predator made tiny mistakes under pressure. Sophia's analytical mind thrived in these conditions. "He's testing us," she said, highlighting patterns of information flow on the digital map. "Every movement we make, he's watching. Every decision he's gauging. But for the first time, we're seeing a crack." Ethan leaned back, exhaustion and adrenaline coexisting uneasily. "And that crack," he said slowly, "is our foothold." To capitalize on it, they began designing subtle countermeasures. Emails were routed through multiple servers, traces were intentionally misleading, and communications with allies outside the company were disguised as routine business interactions. Every move had to be calculated, every step measured. Damien Black thrived on predicting behavior. Unpredictability was their greatest weapon. Yet the risk was ever present. Martin Kessler, the first betrayer, had eyes and ears throughout the company. Other potential betrayers were still unknown. Any misstep could expose them, leading to professional ruin, or worse. Ethan was acutely aware that Damien's power extended beyond office politics. His influence in law enforcement, the judiciary, and political circles meant that mistakes could have consequences far outside the building. Late one evening, while reviewing a series of internal communications, Ethan noticed a pattern. Certain meetings were scheduled only after Martin accessed sensitive files. The subtle orchestration suggested that Damien was not only aware of their investigation but was actively manipulating it, feeding disinformation to gauge reactions. The silent switch had fully flipped. Damien was now playing his hand, testing, observing, controlling. Sophia stood over the digital map, tracing lines and connections. "We can't make a single false move," she said, tone steady but intense. "He's no longer a step behind us. We're in his game now and he's dictating the tempo." Ethan rubbed his temples. The mental weight was immense, but the clarity of the stakes sharpened his focus. Damien's network was dangerous, yes, but it was also predictable, if one knew the rules. And Ethan knew them from years of studying human behavior, strategy, and deception. That night, as the city lights reflected off the office windows, Ethan realized the silent switch wasn't just Damien's awareness, it was a turning point. They were no longer gathering information passively, they were active participants in a psychological battle, moving within a network designed to manipulate and destroy. Every interaction with employees, every access to sensitive data, every decision carried consequences. Yet, within this high-stakes environment, Ethan felt a surge of determination. The recognition by Damien, the subtle tests, the intricate traps, these were all signals that he was on the right path. The wolf had noticed the scent of prey, and now the hunt had truly begun. Ethan and Sophia worked deep into the night, refining strategies, analyzing patterns, and preparing for the inevitable moves Damien would make. The silent switch had shifted the balance of awareness. Damien knew they were watching. And now, they had to ensure that he never knew how much they had uncovered. By dawn, Ethan looked out over the city once more, its endless lights stretching into the horizon. Manhattan continued unaware of the silent war above. Damien Black, predator and manipulator, had flipped the switch. And Ethan Carter, along with Sophia Hayes, was ready to meet it, not with fear but with precision, patience, and calculated audacity. The next moves would determine survival, trust, and power. And in the shadows of the city, the silent game had reached its first true turning point. The office had emptied, leaving only the hum of servers and the faint tapping of keys from Ethan and Sophia. Manhattan's skyline glimmered like a constellation of secrets, oblivious to the silent war taking place in the glass towers above. Each light represented lives moving on, unaware that in this fortress of steel and glass, loyalty and betrayal were being tested in ways no one outside could imagine. Ethan reviewed the latest network analysis. The web of Damien Black's empire was more intricate than they had imagined. Offshore accounts, encrypted emails, shell companies, and political influence formed a lattice that seemed impenetrable. And yet, the most dangerous element wasn't the complexity, it was the people. Human nature, he had learned, was far less predictable than any code or algorithm. Loyalties could fracture, allegiances could shift, and the smallest crack could destabilize the entire structure. Sophia pointed at the screen, highlighting a set of communications they hadn't noticed before. "These aren't random," she said, her voice low and intense. "Look at the timestamps, the recipients. Someone within the inner circle is feeding selective information. It's not Damien. It's someone else. Someone we might be able to trust, or at least manipulate." Ethan's brow furrowed. A mole within the network, possibly a double agent? Or someone who's grown disillusioned with Damien? "Exactly," Sophia replied. "And if we can find them, we gain not just information but leverage." The search for potential allies within the empire became their next priority. Every employee, every associate, every name on a ledger or email chain was scrutinized. The further they delved, the more apparent it became. Damien had built a kingdom reliant on fear, loyalty bought with subtle incentives, and intimidation that left no room for dissent. But even in kingdoms ruled by predators, dissent existed. It just had to be coaxed into the open. Late that evening, a contact from the underworld reached out. Known only as Rico, a discreet intermediary with ties to organized crime and finance alike, he offered a meeting. Ethan and Sophia agreed, fully aware of the risks. Meeting someone with direct access to Damien's external network could either be a breakthrough or a trap. They chose a quiet warehouse in the industrial district for the rendezvous. The smell of oil, rust, and damp concrete filled the air. A single overhead bulb cast long shadows, distorting shapes into threatening forms. Rico waited, casual yet alert, his eyes scanning constantly. "You're aware of the dangers," Rico began, his voice a gravelly whisper, "and you understand what's at stake. Damien doesn't forgive mistakes. And yet, he underestimates those who operate in silence." Ethan nodded. "We need to understand his network. Offshore accounts, communications, alliances outside the company. We need proof, not speculation." Rico smirked. "Proof is dangerous, but so is knowledge. What you have to remember is this. The people closest to Damien are his instruments. Some are loyal. Some are afraid. And some are waiting for the right moment to switch sides." That last statement struck a chord with Ethan. The first betrayal by Martin Kessler had revealed a fracture within the inner circle. Rico's information suggested that fractures were more widespread than they had imagined. The shadows of loyalty extended far beyond what was visible, but those willing to act against Damien could become critical allies. They left the warehouse with a renewed sense of purpose but also a heavier burden. Each step outside the safe confines of the office was a potential exposure. Manhattan streets, alive with late-night traffic and neon reflections, suddenly felt more dangerous. Every passerby, every car, every window could conceal eyes watching, listening. Back at the office, they integrated Rico's intelligence into their existing network map. Patterns emerged that had been invisible before. Certain transfers aligned with meetings that were never publicly disclosed. Communications hinted at coordination between Damien's internal staff and external operatives. Ethan realized that even small mistakes, unnoticed by most, could reveal the architecture of Damien's control. As the night deepened, Ethan's mind raced. The danger was no longer abstract, it was immediate. One email misdirected, one interaction too conspicuous, and Damien's network could strike back. Martin Kessler had been a warning. The first pawns were already in motion. And Damien's awareness, now fully engaged after the events of Chapter 7, meant that every step they took would be scrutinized. Sophia, sensing his tension, laid a hand lightly on his shoulder. "We're not alone," she whispered. "There are people like Rico who are waiting for a chance. The trick is knowing who to trust and when to move." Ethan exhaled, the adrenaline and exhaustion coexisting in an uneasy balance. The first ally had been identified, but the real challenge lay in coordinating actions without tipping off Damien. Trust would be a scarce commodity in the days ahead. Every step, every maneuver, every message had to be calculated with precision. They spent the remainder of the night analyzing, planning, and preparing. Each new piece of information brought clarity and danger in equal measure. The line between ally and enemy was razor thin, and any misstep could prove fatal. Ethan realized that Damien's empire wasn't just about wealth and influence. It was about the careful orchestration of human behavior, fear, and loyalty. As dawn approached, the first light of morning glimmered across the skyline. Manhattan awoke, unaware of the silent battle taking place in the towers above. Ethan and Sophia sat back, exhaustion evident, but determination burning brighter than ever. The shadows of loyalty, betrayals, and hidden allegiances had been partially illuminated. And with that illumination came opportunity, a chance to outmaneuver Damien Black at his own game. Tonight had proven one thing. Survival depended not just on intelligence or courage, but on understanding the subtle dynamics of loyalty, fear, and manipulation. Damien's empire was vast, but even the most meticulously built fortress had cracks. The question was whether Ethan and Sophia could exploit them before being crushed under the weight of the predator's gaze. They had crossed into the dangerous heart of Damien's world, and there was no turning back. The office air was thick with tension, heavier than any Ethan Carter had felt in years. Manhattan's skyline shimmered beyond the glass walls, oblivious to the silent storm brewing within Damien Black's empire. Every email, every phone call, every whisper in the hall could be a weapon. And tonight, Ethan realized the predator they had been chasing was no longer just aware. He was actively retaliating. Damien's subtle tactics had begun. Small misdirections, sudden reassignment of responsibilities, casual insinuations during meetings, all designed to test loyalty and probe weaknesses. Employees whispered about colleagues in hushed tones, suspicion curling like smoke through the cubicles. One misstep could trigger a cascade of consequences. Martin Kessler's betrayal had been a warning. Now the game was escalating. Ethan and Sophia convened in their makeshift war room, the soft glow of multiple monitors illuminating tired faces. "He knows we're looking deeper," Ethan said, voice low. "This isn't just observation anymore. He's probing for weaknesses and we need to anticipate them before he strikes." Sophia nodded, tapping on a spreadsheet highlighting recent anomalies. "Look at these transfers. They're too clean now. Damien is controlling the narrative. He's altering perceptions, planting false trails. And he's watching us. Every move we make is feeding him information about how we think." Ethan leaned back, the weight of the office chair grounding him in the chaos. "He's testing us," he muttered, "watching our reactions, trying to break us." And then came the first real test. A meeting was scheduled with the senior leadership team, Damien at the head of the table, his presence magnetic yet menacing. Ethan and Sophia entered cautiously, aware that every expression, every posture could be scrutinized. Damien greeted them with his characteristic smile, warm yet predatory, before addressing the room. "Team," Damien began, voice smooth, authoritative, "I've noticed some irregularities. Miscommunications. Perhaps even lapses in judgment. Loyalty, after all, is not just about performance. It's about trust." His gaze lingered on Ethan, subtle but unmistakable, then shifted to Sophia. "And trust is something that must be earned, constantly tested." The words hung in the air, a carefully calibrated threat. Ethan's jaw tightened, understanding the dual message: behave perfectly or face consequences. He felt the weight of Damien's scrutiny, the subtle pressure designed to fracture confidence, induce self-doubt, and manipulate responses. Sophia's hand brushed against his under the table, a quiet signal of solidarity. They had prepared for moments like this, but no preparation could completely mitigate the tension that Damien could evoke with a single glance. Over the following days, the strain intensified. Emails were monitored more closely, internal reports were double-checked for errors that didn't exist, and whispers of potential leaks circulated among employees. Ethan and Sophia realized Damien's strategy was psychological warfare. He was not just a manipulator of numbers and influence but of minds. One evening, Ethan found a note slipped under his office door. No signature, no trace, just a typed message. "We know you're watching. One misstep and all will be revealed." His pulse quickened. Damien was tightening his net, using fear and uncertainty to assert control. Ethan understood then that their survival depended on not only gathering evidence but also maintaining composure under pressure. Any sign of panic, any subtle hint of fear, could be exploited. Sophia joined him moments later, noticing the note. "It's more than a warning," she said quietly. "It's a message that he knows the boundaries we're crossing. And he's reminding us who controls the perimeter." Ethan nodded, the reality of the situation sinking in. Damien's reach extended beyond the office, beyond the immediate team. He had eyes and ears everywhere, and the longer they remained undetected, the greater the risk. Yet retreat was not an option. They were committed to exposing the truth, to dismantling the network from within despite the dangers. They devised strategies to counteract Damien's psychological games. Subtle misdirections, layered communications, and carefully controlled interactions. Each step was measured, each move deliberate. Ethan realized that survival in Damien's world required a mastery of both information and perception. Meanwhile, the network of loyalty within the company began to shift. Some employees, witnessing the subtle tension and manipulation, began questioning their own allegiances. The shadows of trust fractured further as uncertainty seeped into the ranks. Ethan and Sophia observed silently, knowing that exploiting these fractures could provide critical leverage, but only if executed with precision. Late one night, as they reviewed transaction patterns and employee interactions, a revelation struck Ethan. Damien's manipulations were systematic, but they were also predictable. Certain triggers consistently elicited reactions. A delayed email, a misdirected report, a strategically timed question in a meeting. By identifying these triggers, Ethan realized they could not only survive Damien's tests but begin to anticipate them, gradually turning the psychological game in their favor. Sophia's gaze met his, unwavering and confident. "We've been reacting," she said. "Now we need to take control. We anticipate, we manipulate, we steer the narrative. That's the only way to outplay him." Ethan agreed. The first fractures of trust had been revealed, both within Damien's network and within themselves. They had learned to navigate fear, uncertainty, and deception. But the true challenge lay ahead, applying this knowledge without tipping their hand, and continuing to expose the hidden mechanisms of Damien's empire while remaining invisible. Manhattan's lights glittered through the office windows, the city alive and indifferent. Ethan felt the duality of his position, hunter and hunted, strategist and pawn. Damien Black had recognized them as threats, activated his psychological arsenal, and was observing their every move. The silent pressure, the careful orchestration of loyalty and fear, was a crucible. Yet within this pressure Ethan found clarity. The fractures of trust, those first subtle betrayals, were not merely obstacles. They were opportunities. By understanding who could be swayed, who could be leveraged, and who would falter under the weight of Damien's scrutiny, Ethan and Sophia could begin to shift the balance. The night deepened, shadows stretching across the office floor. Ethan and Sophia worked quietly, methodically, integrating new intelligence, reinforcing their positions and preparing for the next phase. Damien's psychological games had escalated the stakes, but they had adapted. The silent fracture of trust, the cracks in loyalty, would not destroy them. They would guide them toward the opening they needed. By dawn, Ethan Carter understood one undeniable truth. In Damien Black's empire, survival was a function of perception, patience, and the careful orchestration of human behavior. Any misstep could be fatal, but any insight could become a weapon. The shadows of loyalty had been fractured, the game had escalated, and the path forward was fraught with peril, but also with opportunity. Manhattan awoke, oblivious to the subtle battles waged above. And Ethan Carter, with Sophia Hayes at his side, was ready to step fully into the storm. The city had shifted from the calm of early morning to the restless pulse of mid-afternoon. Manhattan's streets were alive with motion, oblivious to the quiet war unfolding above them. Ethan Carter and Sophia Hayes moved through the office with calculated precision, every glance, every gesture, every keystroke measured. Damien Black was aware. Damien Black was watching. And now the stakes had never been higher. Ethan sat at his terminal, reviewing the files one last time. Each document, each wire transfer, each email chain was meticulously cataloged, cross-referenced, and backed up in multiple secure locations. The plan was simple in theory but perilous in practice. Deliver undeniable proof of Damien's illicit activities to the FBI. In reality, the path was anything but simple. Damien's network of influence spanned not just the company but the city itself, touching law enforcement, political circles, and private contractors. Any misstep could alert him, compromise their position, and put their lives in jeopardy. Sophia approached, her expression sharp and focused. "We have to move tonight," she said quietly. "The longer we wait, the more he monitors, the more he anticipates. He's already seen the first cracks. If we delay, Those cracks could seal our fate instead of opening a path. Ethan nodded, tension coiling in his chest. We've done everything we can to cover our tracks internally. Now it's external. The FBI is the only leverage we have strong enough to counter Damien. But even they will need a solid case, and that case has to be airtight. One false move, one hint of manipulation, and it collapses. The plan was set. Ethan and Sophia would extract the final set of critical documents that evening. These files included correspondence tying Damien directly to offshore accounts, coded communications with external operatives, and internal reports designed to mislead the unsuspecting. Every file was a piece of the puzzle, and missing any one could render the case inconclusive. They began preparations with the precision of seasoned operatives. Digital trails were obfuscated, backups were encrypted, and decoy access points were established to mislead Damien's monitoring. Ethan felt the familiar surge of adrenaline and focus, the same sensation that had sharpened him during countless FBI investigations. Only now the enemy wasn't a distant criminal organization. It was a predator sitting high above the city, watching every movement. As night fell, the tension in the office deepened. Every noise, every shadow, every subtle movement became amplified in Ethan's mind. Damien's psychological games had escalated the stakes. The silent pressure, combined with the uncertainty of who might betray them next, created an atmosphere almost unbearable. Martin Kessler's prior betrayal loomed over them as a cautionary tale, a reminder that even trusted faces could conceal lethal intentions. Sophia adjusted the lighting on their temporary command center, creating pockets of shadow and minimizing visible movement. "We have an hour," she whispered. "The security sweep passes in 30 minutes. After that, the floor is safe for 5 to 6 minutes, and that's all we get to move the data undetected." Ethan's pulse quickened. Timing was everything. The extraction had to be flawless. Any irregularity could trigger alerts, surveillance logs, and Damien's direct intervention. They moved with deliberate, synchronized motions, each key press, each file transfer, and each handshake calculated to minimize detection. The first critical transfer was initiated. Encrypted files flowed into secured drives, silently and invisibly, like a whisper through a storm. Ethan monitored network activity in real time, ensuring no anomalies appeared that might signal Damien or his lieutenants. Every moment stretched, every second a heartbeat that could betray them. Suddenly, a subtle sound, a footstep outside the server room, made Ethan freeze. The automated doors to the hallway opened slightly, and a shadow crossed the threshold. Not a security guard, but someone else, likely a loyalist of Damien's, conducting an unscheduled check. Ethan held his breath, eyes locked on the monitor, tracking both the data transfer and the intruder's position. Sophia pressed herself into the shadowed corner, silent as a phantom. The figure paused, scanning the server racks, then moved away without noticing the two of them. Ethan exhaled slowly, the tension draining in a controlled manner. "Close call," he whispered. "Damien's reach is everywhere. We have to account for these patrols." The final files were queued, their extraction a delicate balance of timing and stealth. Ethan initiated the transfer to the FBI's secure drop point, monitored by an intermediary trusted outside the corporate network. Each megabyte of data felt like a brick being carried across a tightrope, the potential for disaster never far from his mind. Halfway through, a notification pinged on Ethan's terminal. An anomaly. Someone, somewhere, had attempted unauthorized access on a mirrored account. Damien was testing them, probably feeding the system false triggers to observe their reactions. Ethan's pulse surged, but his hands remained steady. He implemented pre-planned countermeasures, rerouting the remaining data, masking traces, and maintaining a calm exterior. Sophia, sensing his heightened focus, gave a slight nod. Their coordination was perfect. Years of experience in observation, investigation, and psychological warfare had honed them into a seamless unit. The last of the files transferred successfully. A tense minute passed before they confirmed that no immediate alarms had been triggered. The case, now in the hands of the FBI, was secure, at least for the moment. Exiting the server room, they navigated back through the building, each step deliberate. The shadows of loyalty and betrayal hung around them like a palpable fog. They had crossed lines, defied the predator, and achieved a significant victory, but Damien Black's reach remained formidable. Later, in the quiet aftermath, Ethan reviewed the implications. Damien's network had been partially exposed, but the wolf was still at large, his empire intact in many respects. The extraction had provoked him, and retaliation was inevitable. Ethan knew that the coming days would require the same combination of stealth, intelligence and psychological acuity that had brought them this far. As dawn broke over Manhattan, casting a golden hue across the skyline, Ethan Carter understood one immutable truth. The storm had gathered, its first lightning strike revealed, but the thunder was yet to come. The battle was far from over. Survival depended not just on courage, but on anticipation, strategy, and the ability to navigate a predator's world without becoming prey. Manhattan awoke, still unaware of the silent war above it. Ethan and Sophia, exhausted yet resolute, prepared for the inevitable confrontation, knowing that the next phase would test everything: loyalty, intellect, and nerve. The gathering storm had arrived, and the city's predators were sharpening their claws. The city was quiet that morning, though Manhattan never truly slept. The glow of the early sun reflected off glass towers, giving the streets below a golden shimmer. Yet inside the high-rise office that had been Damien Black's kingdom for decades, silence carried a weight far heavier than any morning. Damien's empire, the meticulously constructed network of influence, finance, and intimidation, was beginning to crumble. Ethan Carter watched from the corner of the room as law enforcement officers moved with precision. Uniforms and suits intertwined, documenting, seizing, and securing files. The FBI had arrived, executing warrants, and Damien Black, once untouchable, was finally being led away in handcuffs. His expression, calm and composed as ever, masked a storm beneath. Even in defeat, he radiated authority, reminding everyone of the predator he had been. Sophia Hayes stood beside Ethan, her face pale but resolute. "It's over," she whispered, though both knew the truth was more complicated. The physical arrest of Damien did not erase the network he had built. Connections ran deep, and the aftermath would be chaotic. Ethan felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Years of observation, careful calculation, and relentless pursuit had culminated in this moment. Yet the consequences of their actions rippled outward. Colleagues who had remained silent, employees who had trusted Damien, even peripheral associates, everyone would be scrutinized, questioned, and judged. As Damien was escorted through the building, his presence seemed to command attention even in captivity. Ethan noticed subtle glances from employees: fear, disbelief, even admiration. Damien had ruled through psychological dominance as much as corporate authority, and his absence left a vacuum that was immediately apparent. Sophia adjusted her coat, trying to steady herself against the undercurrent of tension. "This isn't just a victory," she said. "It's a reckoning. Lives will be examined, decisions questioned, and trust broken. We're part of this now." Ethan nodded. The weight of responsibility settled over him. They had done the right thing, exposing the corruption and criminality, yet he understood that exposure brought consequences. Some would resent them. Others might even seek retribution for having unveiled the truth. In the hours that followed, the FBI methodically collected evidence: servers, laptops, encrypted files, and documents. Each piece told a story of manipulation, betrayal, and criminal intent. Ethan and Sophia had worked meticulously to ensure the most critical evidence reached the authorities securely, and now it formed the backbone of the case against Damien. Yet amidst the procedural efficiency, Ethan's mind drifted to the human cost. Employees whose loyalty had been coerced, individuals complicit out of fear, and the first betrayer, Martin Kessler, each played a role in the web Damien had woven. Justice was being served, yes, but the psychological fallout would linger far longer than any court ruling. Sophia placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "We've exposed the empire, but we can't control the aftermath. People will react in ways we can't predict. And some may not understand the sacrifices we've made to get here." Ethan exhaled slowly, acknowledging the truth. The arrest of Damien was a tangible victory, but the intangible consequences, fear, mistrust, and the lingering shadow of his manipulations, would echo through the city and the lives of everyone involved. Later that evening, Ethan and Sophia met with the FBI team to debrief, ensuring that their intelligence was fully integrated into the ongoing investigation. Questions were asked, clarifications made, and gaps filled. The agents were thorough, professional, yet Ethan couldn't shake the awareness that Damien's influence had touched aspects of the system that extended beyond their immediate control. As the meeting concluded, Ethan stepped out onto the balcony, looking over the city. The streets glistened from a recent rain, reflecting lights and shadows. Manhattan seemed peaceful, but beneath its surface, lives were shifting. Damien's arrest had set off a cascade of revelations. Hidden alliances exposed, loyalty fractured, reputations at risk. Sophia joined him silently. "You're thinking about the people," she said softly. "The ones caught in the middle, the ones who'll have to pick sides now." Ethan nodded. And the ones who won't forgive us even though we did the right thing. The weight of responsibility was heavy. They had dismantled a predator's empire, yet the human cost was real. Employees who had been loyal out of fear would now have to navigate a new reality. Allies, both willing and coerced, would reassess their positions. And Damien, even in custody, would continue to exert influence, through knowledge, connections, and sheer presence in the collective consciousness. Night fell, the city lights twinkling like distant stars. Ethan and Sophia returned to their office one last time, reviewing files, consolidating notes, and ensuring nothing critical had been overlooked. The adrenaline of the past weeks gave way to exhaustion, yet the mental imprint of Damien's empire lingered. The lessons of surveillance, manipulation, and loyalty would not fade quickly. Finally they sat back, the hum of the city below their sanctuary. "We did it," Sophia said, her voice quiet but resolute. "We stopped him." Ethan allowed himself a small nod. "Yes. But the aftermath, that's something we'll deal with for a long time. People will remember Damien, but they'll also remember the fractures, the betrayals, the shadows he left behind." Sophia looked at him thoughtfully. "And we'll carry them too. The memory, the responsibility, the choices we made." Ethan gazed out over the skyline, understanding fully the gravity of what they had accomplished. Damien Black, the untouchable predator, had fallen. But the human and systemic consequences of his empire's exposure would echo through the lives of everyone involved. For Ethan and Sophia, the victory was bittersweet. Justice had been served, the predator removed, yet the city remained a place where shadows of loyalty and betrayal persisted. And in the quiet moments, long after the city had settled, the memory of Damien's empire, and the lessons learned in its shadow, would remain indelible. The city was quiet that evening, though Manhattan never truly slept. From the high-rise office that had been the epicenter of Damien Black's empire, Ethan Carter and Sophia Hayes gazed out over the streets below, the glow of the neon lights reflecting against rain-slicked pavement. Manhattan seemed indifferent, alive in its ceaseless rhythm, yet for Ethan and Sophia, the silence carried a weight that words could not capture. Damien Black had been arrested, his empire fractured, and his influence curtailed. The FBI had secured the critical evidence Ethan and Sophia had meticulously collected, ensuring that justice would follow. Yet the victory was far from simple. The ripples of betrayal, fear, and manipulation extended far beyond the office walls, touching every employee, ally, and adversary who had been caught within Damien's web. Ethan allowed himself a deep breath, the exhaustion of the past weeks pressing down. The adrenaline, the constant awareness, the careful calculations, they had all culminated in this moment. But the true test was now, navigating the aftermath, understanding the consequences, and processing the profound weight of their choices. Sophia stood beside him, arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the streets below. "It's done," she said softly. "We stopped him." Ethan nodded, though he knew the statement was only partially true. Damien was out of immediate control, yes, but his legacy, his network, his influence, the scars left on people's lives, remained. "Yes," he replied quietly, "but the aftermath, that's the real challenge. People will react. Some will resent us. Others will be grateful, cautiously. And Damien, even from prison, he'll find ways to manipulate the perception of his fall." Sophia looked at him with a faint smile. "We've done everything we can. The rest is out of our hands." The weeks following Damien's arrest were a delicate balance of public scrutiny, private reflection, and strategic oversight. Employees were questioned, assets were audited, and the remnants of Damien's operations were carefully dismantled. Ethan and Sophia found themselves navigating a labyrinth of media attention, legal processes, and the fragile alliances of those who had survived the predator's reign. In quiet moments, Ethan would reflect on the sequence of decisions that had led them here. Identifying anomalies in financial records, confronting betrayal, navigating psychological traps, coordinating with external allies like Rico, and ultimately delivering the evidence that ensured Damien's arrest. Each step had been fraught with danger, yet each had reinforced the lessons of vigilance, strategy, and resilience. Sophia, ever perceptive, noticed Ethan's contemplative state. "You're thinking about the people caught in the middle," she said, her voice gentle. "The employees, the allies, even the betrayers. It's not just about stopping Damien. It's about the human cost of everything we've done." Ethan nodded. "Exactly. We dismantled an empire, yes. But trust, loyalty, and lives, they're more fragile than any network. Damien knew that. He weaponized it. And even now, the repercussions are unfolding. Despite the weight, there was a sense of accomplishment, subtle yet profound. They had acted with precision, courage, and intellect, turning the tide against a predator who had seemed untouchable. Their work had not only exposed criminality but had also preserved integrity in a system designed to obscure it. One evening, after the office had emptied and the city outside had quieted, Ethan and Sophia returned to the rooftop terrace. The wind was cool, carrying the scent of rain and concrete. Below, the streets glimmered like veins of light in the living city. For a moment, they allowed themselves to simply breathe, absorbing the enormity of what had transpired. Sophia broke the silence. "Do you ever wonder if it's really over?" Ethan considered her question. "In some ways, no. There will always be predators, always shadows in the corners. But we've made a difference. We've shown that vigilance, intelligence, and courage can counter influence, fear, and manipulation." She smiled faintly. "And that even in silence, victory can be achieved. Quietly, deliberately, without spectacle." Ethan looked over the city, reflecting on the journey from the first anomalies, the first betrayals, and the silent observations of Damien's manipulations, to this moment of measured triumph. Each challenge, each high-stakes maneuver, had forged a deeper understanding of human behavior, loyalty, and the subtle dynamics of power. In the weeks that followed, Ethan and Sophia gradually withdrew from the immediate chaos. They ensured that critical evidence remained secure, that the FBI had all necessary documentation, and that those at risk from Damien's lingering influence were protected. Slowly, life resumed a semblance of normalcy, though the lessons of vigilance, strategy, and human complexity remained indelible. One quiet night, as Ethan reviewed notes from the case for the final time, he felt a subtle shift, a release of tension tempered by the awareness of continued responsibility. The city outside sparkled in its ceaseless rhythm, indifferent to human triumphs and failures. Yet in their corner of the world, justice had been served. Damien Black had fallen. Sophia joined him, glancing over the documents. "You know," she said softly, "we've learned more than just the mechanics of his empire. We've learned about ourselves, about human nature, about what it takes to navigate shadows without losing our integrity." Ethan nodded. "And that, ultimately, is the real victory. Not the arrest, not the dismantled network, but knowing that in the quiet, deliberate moves, we can create change, preserve justice, and survive the storms." As they stepped onto the rooftop terrace one last time, the city stretched endlessly before them. Manhattan was alive, vibrant, indifferent. But for Ethan and Sophia, it symbolized resilience, strategy, and the silent victories that come from courage, intellect, and calculated action. The predator had been toppled, the network disrupted, and the silent war concluded. And in the quiet aftermath, Ethan Carter and Sophia Hayes understood that sometimes, the most profound victories were those achieved without spectacle, earned in shadows, executed with precision, and carried forward in the enduring lessons of loyalty, courage, and the intricate dance of human behavior. Manhattan's lights twinkled far below, oblivious to the struggles and triumphs that had unfolded above. And Ethan and Sophia, exhausted yet resolute, finally allowed themselves a moment of reflection, knowing that in the silent victory, they had achieved more than justice. They had ensured that the lessons of vigilance and courage would resonate long after the predator had fallen.